So for your etude this week, you're going to be using signals to control different parameters, to modulate different parameters in Max. Here we have a sine wave, triangle, and a rectangle wave. Take some time and explore this. Just review it. It'll be a little bit clearer, I think, after the reading for Sunday. Here on the right side of the 5B patch that's on canvas, you're able to see what happens if you change the phase between two sine waves. So when the right inlet is given an argument of 0.5, they're completely out of phase, 180 degrees out of phase. If you give this a 0 or a 1, they're completely in phase. And of course, there's every gradation between this. Things can be a little bit out of phase, a little bit in phase, etc., etc. In class, we were using this to control volume. So we can attach these to the gain faders of these two objects right here. Turn this down a little bit. And if they were out of phase, you could even have one going into only the left speaker and one only into the right, to increase that effect a little bit more. Now in class we saw that if we speed this up a little bit, usually the sawtooth wave will sound louder than the triangle wave. But we saw if we sped this up too much, you get kind of chaotic results. The reason is that what we're doing here is we're converting this signal, which is a continuous flow of numbers, using snapshot, we're converting that into a series of numbers in Max. And these numbers have a limit. They can't go that fast. They can't go at the sampling rate, which might be something like 44,000 times per second. So in order to get really fast results, you should always use signals. If you wanted to raise this into the audible frequency range and get cleaner results, you would have to use this signal to control the amplitude rather than converting it to a number in Max. So what we can do, if we wanted to do that, we can set the amplitude down here, delete these patch cords, and we can use these numbers right here, this multiplication tilde, to control the amplitude of these two oscillators. So we'll first have to scale this. Remember that the sine wave oscillates, the amplitude range of the sine wave is between -1 and 1. And we want to scale that to between 0 and 1, because the lowest amplitude we want is 0. Remember, if you give this a negative number, it will just take the absolute value. In that case, we have a limit on that float. But if you give this a negative number, Max will interpret that as being a high amplitude. So we want to scale the -1 we want to scale this to avoid any negative numbers. Attach the signal of this cycle into the right inlet. And now you see, instead of controlling the gain down here in Max, we're controlling the amplitude right here with a signal. And it's pretty great. You can see exactly how the amplitude is changing over time. And we'll do the same with our second cycle object right here. And now they are out of phase. I'll make that easy A. There we go. And now if we were to speed this up, you basically have amplitude modulation. So this is just to demonstrate the difference between the signals and the numbers in max. If you're modulating stuff really slowly, for example, if you're modulating a metro object to change the speed of something, as you see in patch number 6, then you're going to want to generally use a max number. If you're modulating stuff that could go into the audible range, you're probably going to want to use a signal. Otherwise, you get really unpredictable results. Anyway, for your etude this week, you're going to be using these oscillators to modulate the different parameters of this patch 006 right here. If you're already comfortable in Max and you have your own patches built that have various numbers, different variables that you can manipulate with numbers, feel free to work on that instead. Again, if you're just getting started and you don't have pre-existing Max patches that you can use, just build off of this patch right here that we started on last week. I'm just going to delete this for now and demonstrate some of the possibilities. This came up in class. So when I turn audio on here, I can hear the previous patch we were working on. When you use the EasyDeck object, it turns the audio on across all open windows in Max. So go ahead and just close that. If you're getting sounds from other windows, close them. And right here, I'll lower this a little bit. We're using this cycle object, converting it to a number using snapshot. And then we're scaling that number between 220 and 900. So this is the lower and upper limit that we're oscillating between. Down to 220 up to 900. I'll slow this down even more actually. And so you get this really clean, very nice acceleration and deceleration. Again, because we're using the cycle object, I'll pull this up so that we can visualize a little bit of what's going on. This is how the cycle object is behaving. It accelerates, and then it decelerates as it goes up. Right there, it's at its slowest point, and then it gradually goes to the middle and goes down. So this is the kind of motion that we're dealing with right now. If we were to replace that, let me just revert this back to how it was before. If instead of a cycle object, we used a triangle object to modulate this value, interesting. I don't know what happened there. As you remember, let me just double check, see what's going on here. But as you remember, these two inputs, inlets, will control the low and high outlets of the scale object. So I don't know what really happened there. It's interesting. It's not going all the way down, and it's not going all the way up. So it looks like the triangle wave has an amplitude that isn't quite -1 to -1. It might be -0.5 to 0.5. I think that might be it. Yep, that was it, I think. Strange. Oh, that's very strange. In any case, I'll think about that. I don't know what exactly is going on there. cycle is behaving normally. Let's take a look at the rectangle wave. I know this one is between negative 0.5 and 0.5. So you can see, just like this wave right here, again I'll go back to how this was. The way the rectangle wave or the square wave behaves is it stays at a high value and then it immediately goes to the low value, and then back to the high and then back to the low. It just alternates between them. You can see that's exactly what's going on here. We're still, the frequency is a little too high to hear. So if we were to lower the rate of change here, it's going to hang out at the low value for a while, then it'll ramp up to the high value. And with a duty cycle of 0, it spends the same amount of time in the low value as in the high value. If we were to change the duty cycle to be, for example, let's say 0.1, it's going to spend a long time up here at 900, and then it'll really quickly go to 220 and then right back up. If we give it a duty cycle of 0.9, it'll do the opposite. So it spends a long time at 220. Again, this is approximately the lowest range right here. I don't know why it's not exact. And then it goes occasionally a slow note. So again, this is just to demonstrate how the technical components of these signals affect the way that in this case, the metro object behaves. So by changing the duty cycle, you can change essentially the ratios between the low and the high values. You can, of course, modulate the duty cycle. So if we were to copy this, and let's say we change this back to a cycle, and we scale between negative 0.1 and 1, which is the sine waves values, and we'll scale that between 0 and 1. Let's give this a really slow value. And see what happens here. Speed this up a little bit, otherwise we'll be here forever. So this value is gradually changing, essentially the ratio of the length of the low value versus the high value. Let's go back for now just to the cycle object. I think it's a little bit more interesting. Let's give it a 0.01. And so this will be a really nice slow transition between, we gotta change our scale back to negative 1 to 1. And let's use let's use this same low frequency oscillator to modulate, let's say, the speed of our audio file. So I'm just going to come right out of the same snapshot object. I'll create a new scale. We're going to go again between negative 1 and 1. But we don't want to vary the speed. I'll turn this off. We don't want to vary the speed between 220 and 900 times. So playback speed, it's going to be a little bit ridiculous. So let's say between 0.6 playback speed and like 1.3. So we can come out of the same low frequency oscillator. We've scaled it a little bit differently, and then this is just going into the speed. So right now, as it accelerates, it plays back at a lower speed and the pitch consequently goes down, which is pretty cool. I like that. But if you wanted to reverse it, so it played back quickly as the speed increased, as the speed of the metro increased, we would just reverse these 1.3 to 0.8. And now as the bangs accelerate, the pitch goes up. You hear glissandi now because I sped this up a little bit. So you can imagine this cycle object is also controlling the speed. And if you were to hit play and then crank the speed up, you hear that upward glissando. That's why when you increase the frequency of this modulator, you hear and now we're hearing up and down slides because we're getting actually multiple different full oscillations of the sine wave within each bang that's being sent out of the metro. It's a nice effect. I like that. And of course, if you were to change this, that would either minimize or maximize that effect a little bit. So now we're controlling, you're just sliding between 1.01 playback speed and 0.95. If you were to exaggerate this a lot, and you know, that's really cool. Once you start playing with this, you're going to notice all these really interesting possibilities. So these can be, of course, modulated by different LFOs. So let's use this one to modulate the range at which we're changing the speed, the playback speed. For now, we'll use this cycle object to control our fastest playback speed. So we're going to be scaling between -1 and 1 to maximum playback speed, let's say, of 2.3 and 1.1. That means that our fastest playback speed will be modulating between these two values. If we duplicate this thing, and our lowest playback speed, let's say it will modulate between 0.8 and 1, so that they don't cross. Now you can see that this one is gradually changing. This one's also gradually changing. If we give these slightly different frequencies, 0.1, let's say, they'll gradually also go in and out of phase. So there will be moments where the range that we're modulating the playback speed is really tight. So you'll get these really, really light, tight glissandi, almost like vibrato. And then there will be other moments that just occur naturally as these things go in and out of phase because they're slightly different frequencies, where that's going to be a much wider range, and then you'll hear this crazy sliding up and down. interesting. Let's make this 1.4. And then again, a much more subtle effect. You know, you can of course modulate these as well. You can modulate this, you can modulate these two. You can turn time stretch on and modulate the speed and the pitch separately. There's so many possibilities that you can do. And right now, again, all we're doing is dealing with the sine waves, cycle object. But you can try to incorporate certain things that are being modulated with the triangle wave, other ones with the cycle, other ones with the rectangle, various different duty cycles, as we saw. Yeah, the possibilities are really remarkably endless. Just to demonstrate what we were working on a little bit earlier, if we were to just duplicate all of this, I'm going to have the same toggle, turning both metros on and off. Let's put the same frequency on both cycles right here. And I'd like for this one just to be a little bit out of phase. Well, let's put it completely out of phase. I anticipate what's going to happen here is that as this one is speeding up, this one is slowing down. For now, I'm going to put a pause on the modulation of the speed, and I'm just going to put this one at 1.2, leave that at 0.8, just so we can hear the difference. These will be higher pitched, these will be lower pitched. We can do the same trick and have one going to the left channel, one to the right. So as this one accelerates, this one's really slow. This one starts to accelerate, this one gets slow. They're not quite the same because these two arguments are now slightly different. So in this case, we're using phasing to control the rhythm. We can do the same thing with the speed, so that as one goes up, the other goes down. You can, of course, do the same thing with volume, so that maybe this one accelerates and the volume goes up, and this one decelerates and the volume goes down. There are a lot of possibilities, and I would encourage you really to dig deep, try to explore, and just really experiment. You know, there's nothing you can do to break it. So try to make changes. If you find a patch that you like, save it as whatever you want to. Ooh, got a lot of stuff coming up. Save this as whatever you want to. Modulators, draft 1. Doesn't really matter. And then keep experimenting so that you know if you go down a rabbit hole and you mess things up, you at least have a previous draft or iteration. And for your second etude, just please submit your patch to Canvas. If you're using the standard samples that are either in Max or the piano harmonic samples that I provided, you don't need to upload those. Only upload samples if you're using your own. And if you have any questions, let me know. Take care.